This is why when you're dealing with like an addiction clinic or, there's multiple treatments for multiple different people. How do you know what you need? So it could be emotional. There's a gene called ADR2B that determines how well you deal with negative stimulus and trauma. And if you don't deal with that well, your family could have an experience, a car crash. 3 out of 4 people, no problem. That fourth person, it's the reason they get into addiction. But they're not addicted because of the dopamine. They're addicted because of the escape. Because they can't live on that street anymore. Every time they see that intersection, they feel the pain. Right? So they need the escape. So that person needs a very different solution. What they need to realize is they're an emotionally brilliant person. They can access emotion and recall emotion in a way other people can't. When they think about the problem, they can literally remember the feeling. They hold the grudge. Right? They literally can bring back the feeling viscerally, like it just happened. And that's what PTSD and trauma is. But they need to use that to their advantage and be the emotional leader, be the guide, the rock that everyone leans on, because you're kind of wise about your decisions. You don't make the same mistake twice. But put that in the wrong context, it's going to lead to problems because it's going to be a burden of pain. And there's so many of these examples I can get into, but all I'm saying is that you can personalize. You can know your why, right? The word addiction is far too general.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Going back to where our genes come from, the 50-50, like mom, dad, you get one of each. If it's good, bad, then it kind of meets here in the middle. If it's good, good, you have good. If it's bad, bad. How does that explain differences between siblings?
Yeah. So you have most genes have 3 potential outcomes. So, because you get there's sort of a good version and a bad version. And keep in mind, when we're looking at a gene, it's not that the gene has a version, it's some location on the gene. A gene is thousands of letters long, by the way, just to get to some basic science. Thousands of letters long, that's the length of this code. Sometimes somewhere along that code, there's what we have, what's called a SNP, meaning it was supposed to be a T, but instead it's a C. And now the instruction is a little broken. So that's what the research of genetic sequencing was. Like, we got to first figure out how do you spell this gene. Then we got to figure out where do we see in some genes a broken spelling that causes it to function different. So one parent might give you the gene that doesn't have the broken spelling, and the other one does have the broken spelling. You get 2 copies. So you could either have 2 good spellings, 2 bad spellings, or 1 good, 1 bad. So in that variability, brother and sister could have 2 good, 2 bad, 1 good, 1 bad, right? So it depends on what came from your parents, how much gap there was, and you might get other stuff. Now, that's step 1. What is my genetics? And yes, siblings can be different because you get this from mom, this from dad. It depends which one you got. Second thing is your context is different. One sibling stayed on the farm with mom and dad and lived a healthy life and worked with the animals and is emotionally sound and is connected to their church, et cetera, et cetera. The other one moved to New York and goes running around the block, breathing in pollution every day and sleeps 4 hours a day. With that same genetic code, they're doing 2 entirely different things. So your outcome is going to be different. That's why understanding, first of all, who am I genetically? Here's what I'm wired for. Now, here's the choices that are going to make me thrive. Here's the choices that are going to make me crash and burn. Right? And it's got to be that simple so that people can actually take action on it. And that's where you get that difference from.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's that nature versus nurture argument, right? And it really seems like, it's not one or the or. It's how do these two work in congruency with each other?
Yeah, for sure.
I've heard you talk about, I mean, you've been doing this so long, you've seen so many tests, you reviewed so much information, so much data has been analyzed by you that you're at the point now where you can ask people certain questions and you can get some understanding of their DNA and what their genes are. Can you kind of walk us through that here a little bit?
So we're the only company in the world that did these clinical reviews. So typically, what does a genetic company do? You're researching genes, so you don't meet the patient. You get the genetic sample in the mail, you put it in a machine, you sequence it, you look at some research, and and then they report back. There was a gap between the clinic and the testing, and that's why it wasn't actionable. So we did that. We built the middle, which is let's be a clinic. Those 7,000 people that I was talking about that we researched, we sat with each one of them for hours and hours and hours to understand what we call the phenotype. Your genes here's your list of genes. That's your genotype. What does that equal? That's your phenotype. Now, when I know every single time I see a male balding and I can then ask how old he is, I can start to predict your risk of prostate enlargement and prostate cancer, which no doctor will agree with because the medical literature doesn't say that balding causes cancer. Remember, cause. They're just looking at binary, this equals that. What's actually going on is some men, when they produce testosterone, convert it into what's called DHT, which is sort of the manly man version of testosterone that gives you ripped, striated muscles and you have no fat on your abs. But it's toxic. And so if you make too much of it, you all of a sudden can cause death to hair follicles on your head and enlargement and inflammation of the prostate. So we know those two things are related. So I can, by looking at your head, tell you your prostate health risk. I can, by looking at, simply just by talking to you now, and looking at the way your body's been moving and the way your eyes been moving, I can start to predict things about your neurochemicals. How fast are you clearing them? You know, what level of attention do I have from you? These types of things can start to point to your neurochemicals of your brain. Looking at your body type, I can understand how well you produce progesterone, and then testosterone, and then estrogens. Are you a more estrogen dominant male? This false belief that size and strength comes from testosterone. It actually comes from estrogen. When you see the guy deadlifting 5 plates in the gym, that's estrogen. That mass and strength, but you can't see his, definition, but he's big and strong. That's estrogen, which is also why he has a nice head of hair and shiny skin, right? So we can start to predict things. We can also predict things like sleep. If I ask you questions about how you perceive certain scenarios, okay, going back to my son, here's a good example. Highly irritable, highly distractible. I know that means his serotonin pathway is off. I now know that means he doesn't sleep well at night. And I also know it doesn't mean that he can't fall asleep. It means that he can't stay asleep. Why? And there's 3 different sleep problems. Can't fall asleep, can't stay asleep, sleep through the night, and wake up feeling not rested, down to getting good quality sleep. So in his case, melatonin is that hormone or supplement that puts you to sleep. People already know that. Your brain starts to bind it and use what you made during the day, and that knocks you out, puts you to sleep. In the second half, your body knows at some point you're supposed to actually get up. You're done. And serotonin is the neurochemical that is meant to trigger that. So the sunlight is supposed to come through the window, go through your eyelid, and this orange glow is meant to trigger serotonin binding and utilization, which is now like I'm not asleep anymore. I'm actually waking up, right? So if your brain can't prioritize stimulus because your serotonin receptors are completely off, then any stimulus in that second half, and your brain's confused. And a lot of people resonate with this, where that second half, it's like I'm in deep dreaming state, and then I'm awake, and I'm dreaming, and then I got to go to the washroom, and I'm asleep again, and I got to wake. That up and down, very quick up and down, because temperature's off. Hubby's foot touched me. Hubby pulled on the blanket. There's a weird smell. The air conditioning turns on and off, and it makes a different noise every time it does that. Any one of those stimuluses, remember, your brain at that time is waiting for a stimulus to tell it to wake up and bind serotonin, and it's supposed to be sunlight. And if you can't prioritize, your brain's not waiting for the right stimulus. And that's why these people can't sleep in the second half of their life.